Andy B here. We are still at the Evangelical Alliance office in London, which is brilliant. Myself and Nathan Thomas. We have spoken to, so far, since 10 o'clock, Rachel Heffer on Finding Jesus research. And then we chatted on about being human with Joe and Catherine, which is amazing because I remember the names, which is for me phenomenal. And I've now got in front of me Alicia. Hello.
Hello, good morning. How
Did
are
I
you?
get your name right then? Was
Perfect,
it?
Alicia. Yep.
Yes, I get nervous about names because I like to not offend people by getting names wrong. And it matters to me. I'm terrible, like I forget them, but at least my intention is to get it right to start with.
Strong start. You've done
Well, yeah, maybe. So just very, very briefly, what is it that you do here in your role at EA here in London?
Yeah, so my job title is Head of Public Policy for the Evangelical Alliance, and it's twofold in many ways. There's a level of coordinating our work in all of the 4 parliaments. So we have teams in the Senedd, so in Wales, team in Northern Ireland who work on devolved policy, and we have a team in Holyrood who deal with and engage parliamentarians there. And then my day-to-day role, which is why I'm a bit formally dressed today, is Westminster and Whitehall. So this morning there was a National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast, and essentially my role is to represent our membership within the doors of power and talk very much about what are our members doing, both churches, individuals and organisations, to serve local communities and to share the good news of Jesus. So,
Which is much needed.
Which is exactly in our day very much needed.
When you're in Parliament these days, how long have you been doing this sort of work for EA?
So yeah, I've been in this post since August 2021. So I'm coming into my 4th year. And in that time, we've seen an incredible shift in terms of politics, but also politicians. When I started, it was the first year following COVID. If we remember those days, and Parliament was still coming out of policy of lockdown, but also we had at that point, it was Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And in the following year, it was a revolving door of different Conservative leaders, different prime ministers, followed by the Queen's death, which in policy making terms, that's a lot for Westminster and Whitehall to deal with, the kind of the start-stopping, the insecurity and instability of policy making. And of course, we're only 2 or so years on from the pandemic. So there's still a lot of needs within kind of public services. So that's essentially my role, is to build relationships with politicians, parliamentarians and civil servants on kind of key policy areas of evangelicals.
I'm curious what you think about this. I was listening to, I can't remember the name. It was an big American church, and it was someone from the church who wanted to go into politics in some regard. I've forgotten what. But the bit that I really was curious about chatting to you about is he said this. When he's chatting in the Senate in America, he found that a lot of the politicians they don't know what to do. They see the problems and they can identify them, and they know they've got to do something, but then they don't have the answers. So what he found was they were saying, well, we're doing this thing because someone said it's a good idea and we don't have a better idea, so we're going that way. And that was kind of what he discovered across quite a few people in politics in America, which I figured was probably a fairly good benchmark for how they're at. Is that similar in the UK? And also, have you found that there's more of an openness to you coming in whatever capacity that may be, from the people in our own political environment?
Yes, it's very much a very similar kind of attitude of terms of what is a politician's responsibility, what is the government's responsibility in resolving so many kind of cultural, political, health crises, issues of poverty in the community. And in many ways, there is a responsibility on the government. They've come in with a manifesto, a pledge for change, and articulating what that is still being worked out a year on from the general election. But there's also limitations to what politicians and the law can do. It's very much about civil society. It's about community. And increasingly what we keep advocating for is that the church is in every constituency across these 4 nations that do incredible work across different policy issues, be that education, early years, family support, poverty relief, debt counselling, criminal justice reform, onto other things of kind of health. And last week was a very difficult week within Parliament to do with the beginning and end of life. So very much there is a space for all in resolving kind of common concerns, and the church is very integral to that. In terms of your second question, in terms of how do politicians, parliamentarians engage with evangelicals or the Evangelical Alliance, there's very much an educational piece of what is the distinctiveness of evangelicals in the UK and how does that differ from political engagement in the US. And more often than not, we always speak to the evangelicalism in the UK is very theologically driven, but yet very politically. There is no one party that kind of absorbs that. And just before the general election last year, we produced a report called Thinking Faithfully About Politics that surveyed our members to talk about attitudes to politics, their engagement on issues, political parties. And one of the key things, along with caring for the vulnerable and seeing policies serve them, was also engaging with that evangelicals vote across the political continuum. And so many parliamentarians, particularly this new cohort, are very surprised by that, that it's highly likely that I'm speaking to that MP who might be from the Labour Party, and then weeks down the line speaking to someone who's from the Conservative or the SNP or the Democratic Union Party, for which our members may have voted for them. And so they're surprised by that, but equally keen to learn about how evangelicals are engaged in politics and public life and where there can be commonality in serving kind of local constituency needs.
How do you, I mean, this is, I suppose, my complete lack of any knowledge of this stuff. How do you, as the Evangelical Alliance, get to go into Parliament and then say, hello, Member of Parliament for wherever you are, you're responsible for this area? How do you get that conversation? And then how can that conversation be useful for you to engage with? Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. So I think the first thing to say is, even though I've been in the role for 3 years, the Evangelical Alliance has existed for over 179 years. And that is our leading story of saying from our inception, it's been an organization, a movement of churches, organizations coming together around the centrality of the gospel and the good news of Jesus, serving the public and the common good, and seeking to do well and to kind of speak up about religious freedom issues around, as well as issues of justice, dignity, freedom, and so on and so forth. And so I am always coming in from a perspective that I've inherited a legacy for which that I need to continue and to represent accurately. But then equally within our team, you spoke to people within the missions team. We work very closely with them in terms of what they're seeing at church level, and doing that kind of co-collaboration of conversations so that when I'm meeting a politician, it is a hard work to get time and attention. And so there's very many emails that are sent, calls, there's opportunities to go to things like today, like an event, to kind of put a face to the email and kind of break down stigma or actually just find time to meet. And then once you're in those one-on-one conversations, you're then talking about key policy moments that are happening within the nation at this moment in time. So last week, key votes within the chamber around decriminalising abortion, which is a contested and a hot issue within the UK, both within the church or within politics. But within the organisation, there's been a campaign called Both Lives that very much has a pro-both lens on how do we talk about the legal rights and protection of the unborn, but also supporting women, their well-being, and providing an alternative to abortion. And then equally, at the end of the week, we were talking end of life and whether to legalise assisted suicide dying within England and Wales. And so you're engaging both on theological, philosophical conversations about dignity, human beings, the role of the state. And then equally, a lot of our members do a lot of work, particularly on assisted suicide in kind of end-of-life care support, hospices. And so you're representing their concerns about the most vulnerable and the role of the state to engage. So very much it's the politics of the moment, but then equally my role is to have more of a forward thinking and kind of drawing on our strengths and engagement around freedom of religion or belief. And equally there's conversations about the role of faith in the public square, issues of hate crime amongst religious minorities and whether to squash free speech. And so it's a never-ending cycle, and the legislative table is always busy and keeping us active. So there's a lot to do.
One thing I can certainly know about MPs, I've only met a few in my life, is they seem to work incredibly long days.
They do.
Really long hours, often away from family and friends because they might be based in, I don't know, Berwick-upon-Tweed, but their day job is London.
Yes.
And that's really hard. I heard recently about Wilberforce, one of the things he did really well at was when he left his political arena in London, he went home. Someone quoted out of a book that was written about him that he came in and just played on the floor with his kids. He was like another child.
Yes.
And he did seem to manage to switch off politics and home. And I think that's an interesting one, because a lot of us have heard, well, you shouldn't mix politics and religion. Just don't talk about either of those two things and then life will be fine. What is your perspective on the importance of engaging with politics as the church, as Christians in 2025?
Well, the earth is the Lord's and everything thereof, that
Amen.
the psalmist teaches us that. And so there's no area or sphere of space for which God does not care about and wants to speak into, that wants his character, his kingdom and his nature revealed in. And politics is very much the exchanging of how do we do life as a nation, as communities together, and how do we coexist into that. And I would say to church leaders, to individual Christians, that whilst it might be challenging to enter into that space from a faith perspective, it's very much necessary. I think we're seeing, particularly in the last year alone, that there are very much heated debate and conversation of how do we come together as a society? How do we deal with conflict on the streets? How do we deal with issues of poverty? How do we deal with health inequalities? And all of these conversations are around what are the moral obligations of the state. And I think more often than not, the church and Christians and the scriptures teach us about what that looks like. And so it would be wrong of Christians to withhold that kind of insight and intelligence, that wisdom, and not offer it. I think more often than not, we're not compelling people to our faith convictions and to the teachings of Jesus. We are called to persuade, to urge. And I think equally we should be speaking into places where people are hurting and on issues that deeply impact us all. In faith and politics, there's a desire to separate, but it's very hard to do that when you're talking about moral governance within a nation. So.
I love how you worded that we shouldn't withhold the I suppose the collective wisdom, if you want to put it in. And yours was better than mine, but we shouldn't be withholding that from people because, like you say, EA, more century and a half plus of being and existing and leaving and speaking into people's lives, and I like the way you said we shouldn't be withholding that. And it's easy to want to, or what if they don't like what I say? But we shouldn't be withholding. We had this conversation, I think it was Rachel and I earlier. We have this story of hope. We had the same conversation with Joe and Catherine after 11. We have actually got the answer.
Yes.
Not we think possibly maybe it's quite a good thing. No, we actually have the answer. It's hope. He has a name. His name is Jesus Christ. So I love the fact that you're basically going to what you're doing, saying we shouldn't be withholding this reality of hope.
Absolutely. And this morning at the prayer breakfast, one of the key passages was from John 18, and it's the moment where Jesus is before Pontius Pilate, and where he says in his own words that, his kingdom is not of this world. So there's also a recognition, and I'm also reminded that whilst I care about politics, I believe that it's the role of Christians to lean into that space, to articulate a hopeful message on key different policy areas. Also recognize that politicians cannot usher in the kingdom of God, and that there is actually a limitation to that. That there's something of only what God can do within a nation, within good governance. And so more often than not, I speak to the team of that our role is to put ourselves out of a job where actually we don't need to be influencing politicians around sound judgment on different policy issues, or to articulate the reason and the case for Christ in policy and kind of governance, because he will do that himself. He will reveal all to every politician, to every nation. But in the interim, we are kind of holding the fort, or rather being an evangelist to politicians. We're sharing the gospel of what it looks like through advocacy. So.
I know we had to come to finish because you've got another meeting, but we've got 5 minutes. So just give me a brief story of faith to you. How did Jesus Christ become something that was real to you?
So I was raised in a Christian household, and I'm very thankful for that upbringing. But I would say my faith wasn't my own until I was at age 17, and probably leaning to kind of finding Jesus. It was a friend being intentional, badgering and yes to badgering, keep asking, just come to church, read the scriptures. And through that, rediscovered a faith for my own, but also not just a faith for my own, but also a sense of purpose in that. At that point, I was about to start a degree in politics, and I always knew that I was going to do a job in politics post university. And coming to faith was a kind of a clarifying point, a rallying point that you're going to do politics for the Lord. You're going to learn how to read the scriptures and see about kingship and flawed leadership, as we see in kind of Kings and Chronicles, and the role of the prophets calling the people of God back to him. You're going to learn those scriptures, and you're going to represent that in a modern culture and a modern reality, that justice without the Lord is not possible. And so that has been my own kind of faith journey and discipleship. I've worked in various charities, some within a non-faith background and space, and that was very much my learning grounds, learning the skills of campaigning, learning the skills of advocacy, learning the skills of influence and power of persuasion. And it wasn't until kind of 2021 where the Lord is like, those 10 years, I now want you to reposition and kind of serve the church and represent the church within a political space. And for that, I'm very, very grateful for.
I find this so often in interviews that somebody starts over here and then they sort of get over there, and then they look back and think, but God's brought me to what I'm doing, and here's the thing that I wanted to do, and here's what God's taken of that and redeemed it, or used it, or embellished it, or enhanced it, and now I get to do the very thing that I was passionate about, but now I'm doing it for God.
Amen.
That's got to be awesome.
It sure is. It sure is.
Cool. Alicia, thank you. We're going to go to some more music. This is Andy B. Well, it's actually Stephen D's show at the moment till 3 o'clock, which I've nicked an hour of his. Thank you, Stephen. And we're here till 1 o'clock, broadcasting to you live from the Evangelical Alliance offices in London. Alicia from Advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you.
The July issue of Pure Media, the magazine, comes out on Friday the 4th of July. With a plethora of amazing writers speaking about life, hope, money, technology and more. In our July edition, we take a focus on Matt McKay and his band Meet Your Maker, as well as shining a light on John Cox and so much more. The digital version is always freely available online. But did you know you can also enjoy the convenience of a printed subscription too? For all of this and more, just head over to www.puremediathemagazine.com. www.puremediathemagazine.com.